Hal wiped his hands on a rag and listened to the wind push through the gaps in the hangar walls. Port Caldren was quiet at this hour. It was always quiet. The last cargo ship had lifted off 3 hours ago, and the only sounds left were the low hum of the overhead lights and the distant groan of the cooling engines in Bay 4. He liked it this way. No voices, no orders, no paperwork. Just him, his tools, and the long familiar dark of the hangar floor. He was 53 years old. He had worked this port for 21 of those years. He knew every bolt, every crack, every shadow in this building. He knew which lights flickered before they died and which floor panels were loose and which cargo loaders needed a firm kick on the left side to start properly. He knew this place the way most men knew their own homes. Better maybe. He picked up his lantern and began his last walkthrough of the night. He moved slowly the way he always did, checking the tie-down cables on the parked loaders, checking the fuel line connectors on the standby craft, checking the locks on the eastern storage bays. His boots made a soft, steady sound on the concrete floor. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. He turned the corner past crate 7 and stopped. His lantern swung forward and caught something in the dark. 2 eyes. Large, amber, and very still. They were low to the ground, half hidden behind the corner of a heavy steel crate, and they were watching him the way a frightened animal watches something it cannot yet decide to trust. Hal did not move. He stood there and let the light hold steady. The thing behind the crate shifted slowly and he saw it properly for the first time. It was small. Barely waist high. It had scales that might have been silver once but had gone almost gray, dull and pale from the cold. Its wings were folded tight against its back, pressed flat, trembling faintly with every breath. Its front claws were pressed against the concrete floor, and its tail was curled close around its body like it was trying to hold its own warmth in. It was a dragon. A hatchling. Young enough that its horns had not yet grown past the base of its skull. Hal had seen dragons before. Every port worker had, eventually. Adult dragons passed through the trade route sometimes, massive and careful, giving the smaller craft plenty of distance. They were not common but they were not unknown. A dragon hatchling alone in a cargo hangar in the middle of the night was something else entirely. He crouched down slowly, bringing himself closer to its level. He kept his hands visible and his movements easy. He had worked around enough frightened animals in his life to know that sudden things made bad situations worse. The hatchling watched him come down to its level. Its amber eyes did not blink. Its whole small body was shaking, and Hal could see now that it was not just fear. It was cold. Genuinely, deeply cold. The night outside was bitter, and the hangar was not much warmer. The hatchling had been here for some time. He looked at it and it looked at him. Then it opened its small mouth and spoke. The words came out careful and broken, the way words sound when someone is using a language that is not their own and is concentrating very hard to get it right. The common tongue, shaped by a mouth built for something older and wilder. Please, it said. Human. My mother. She is dying. Hal was quiet for a moment. He studied the small pale face in front of him. The eyes were frightened but steady. Whatever this hatchling was feeling, it had pushed through it to come here to find someone to ask. That was not a small thing. That was an enormous thing for a creature this young and this cold and this alone. He thought about a lot of things in that moment. He thought about the paperwork involved in a dragon incident report. He thought about the Port Authority regulations on unauthorized wildlife on the landing grounds. He thought about the fact that it was nearly the end of his shift and his chair and his flask of warm tea were waiting for him in the break room. He thought about the word dying. He set his lantern down on the top of crate 7. He looked at the hatchling. He said one word. Where? The hatchling blinked. It was a slow blink, the kind that happens when something unexpected cuts through fear and exhaustion and lands somewhere soft. It had come here not knowing what it would find. It had clearly been bracing for argument, for questions, for the long complicated noise that people sometimes made before they decided not to help. It had not been bracing for that single, quiet word. It lifted one trembling claw and pointed. Past the eastern wall of the hangar. Out toward the open field beyond the port boundary, where the grass ran long and dark under the night sky. Hal stood up. He picked up his lantern. He reached back to the wall hook behind him and pulled down his heavy work coat and put it on. He picked up his kit bag from where it sat beside the crate and slung it over one shoulder. He looked down at the hatchling. Show me, he said. The hatchling stood up on unsteady legs. It was shaking from the cold and something else too, something that looked very much like relief. It turned toward the eastern side door and began to move, small claws tapping quietly on the concrete. Hal followed. The wind hit them hard when the door opened. The field beyond the port boundary was black and wide under a clouded sky. Somewhere out there, past the long dark grass, something was waiting. Hal pulled his coat tighter and walked on. The hatchling moved fast for something so small and so cold. It pushed through the long grass with its head down and its wings flat, and Hal followed the soft sound of its claws on the frozen ground. The wind was sharp out here, away from the shelter of the hangar walls. It cut through his coat and made his eyes water. He kept his lantern low so the light would not carry too far across the open field. They walked for about 10 minutes. Maybe a little more. Then Hal smelled it. Metal and heat and something older, something that reminded him of storm air before lightning hit. He had smelled that once before years ago, when a Dragon cargo escort had taken a hard landing on the South Pad. He had not forgotten it. He raised his lantern. She was enormous. She lay in a wide flattened area of grass where her landing had pressed everything down around her like a crater. Dark green scales covered her from nose to tail, each one the size of a roof tile, but many of them along her left side were cracked or missing entirely. Her wings were folded unevenly, the left one bent at an angle that was not natural. Her neck was stretched low along the ground, her great head resting on the earth, and her eyes were closed. Her flank was moving. Slowly. Each breath was a long, difficult thing. The wound ran from just behind her left foreleg all the way back toward her hindquarters. It was deep and dark and still seeping. The grass around her was matted and stained. She had been bleeding for a long time. Hours, Hal guessed. She had flown here bleeding and landed hard and had been lying here ever since. The hatchling went straight to her and pressed its small head against her jaw. The great dragon's eye opened slowly. It was gold. Deep and old and full of pain, the way the eyes of very old creatures get when they have seen too much and endured more than their share. The eye moved. It found Hal standing there with his lantern and his kit bag and his worn work coat. The dragon looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and slow, like stone settling deep underground. The common tongue came naturally to her, shaped without effort, which told Hal she had used it for a very long time. A human, she said. My child brought a human to me. Your child was smart, Hal said. He was already moving, already crouching beside the wound, already opening his kit bag on the flattened grass. This needs sealing. You've lost a lot. She watched him without speaking. He could feel the weight of her attention on him, heavy and measuring, the way very powerful things look at something they are not yet sure about. He did not look up. He focused on the wound. It was bad. Worse up close than from a distance. He used his lantern to see the full length of it and felt his jaw tighten. A wound like this on a machine would have meant scrapping the whole unit. On a living creature it meant something harder to think about. He opened the thermal patch strips first. He had 6 of them, long heavy-duty ones meant for sealing hull breaches on small craft. He pressed the first one along the deepest section of the wound and held it firm until the adhesive took hold against the scale edges. Then the second. Then the third. He worked steadily, not fast, not slow. Steady was what mattered. Steady was what he knew. He used the sealant foam next, running it along the gaps the patches did not fully cover, watching it expand and set in the cold air. Then the clamps, 12 of them, his entire set, pressing the edges of the wound together and locking them in place. His hands were cold and his knees ached from crouching on frozen ground, but he did not stop. The dragon watched him the entire time. The hatchling sat close to her jaw, very still, its amber eyes moving between its mother and the human working quietly at her side. Nearly an hour passed. Hal sat back on his heels and looked at his work. It was not clean. It was not the work of a doctor or a specialist. It was the work of a man who had spent his life fixing broken things with whatever he had available. But the bleeding had slowed. The wound was held. Her breathing, when he listened carefully, was a little easier than before. He began packing his kit back up. You work well, the dragon said softly. For a human. I work well for anyone, Hal said. Something moved in her golden eyes. It might have been the closest thing she had to a smile. Then it faded. Her expression shifted into something more serious, and when she spoke again her voice was quieter, more careful. They will come, she said. The ones who followed me. Armed. They will trace the landing and they will come to this port. You should not be near us when they arrive. Take yourself away from here. You have already done more than any human had reason to do. Hal closed the buckle on his kit bag. He picked it up and set it over his shoulder. He looked at her, then at the small hatchling pressed close against her jaw, then back at her. Is the child safe here with you tonight? She blinked slowly. For now. Yes. Then I'll be back before first light, he said. Get some rest. He picked up his lantern and turned back toward the hangar. Behind him the great dragon was silent for a long moment. Then, very quietly, so quietly he almost did not hear it over the wind, she said one word. Human. He stopped but did not turn. Thank you, she said. Hal walked on. Hal was back in the hangar before the sky had fully lightened. He had not slept. He had gone to the break room, sat in his chair, stared at his flask of tea without drinking it, and thought through everything carefully the way he thought through a difficult engine problem. Step by step. What was broken? What he had available? What needed to happen first? By the time the sky outside the high hangar windows had shifted from black to gray, he had a plan. It was not a complicated plan. Hal had never trusted complicated plans. Simple things held under pressure. Complicated things fell apart. First, the hatchling. He went to the eastern storage corner where he had left it wrapped in a thermal tarp the night before. It was awake. It had probably not slept either. Its amber eyes tracked him as he crossed the floor, alert and watchful, far steadier than any creature that small and that young had any right to be. He crouched down. He spoke quietly. People are going to come this morning, he said. Looking for your mother. I need to move you somewhere they won't find you easily. You need to stay hidden and stay silent no matter what you hear. Can you do that? The hatchling looked at him for a moment. Then it nodded once, small and certain. Hal nodded back. Good enough. He moved it to the deep maintenance bay at the far end of the hangar. It was the oldest part of the building, half separated from the main floor by a heavy dividing wall, used now mostly for storing broken equipment that nobody had gotten around to throwing away. It was dark back there and it smelled like old oil and rust. There were narrow gaps in the outer wall where the cold came through, but Hal packed them with insulation strips and gave the hatchling 2 more thermal tarps and his own spare work jacket, which was far too large and pooled around it like a tent. He positioned a broken cargo loader in front of the bay entrance. Then a shelving unit. Then a second loader angled. It would not fool someone who searched carefully, but it would not look like something worth searching at all. Then he went to the back corner of his work desk, opened the lowest drawer, and found what he was looking for under a layer of old receipts and spare cable ties. A small gray signal card, battered at the edges with a short frequency code written on it in faded ink. He had been given it 12 years ago by a dragon trader who passed through Port Caldren twice a year for several seasons and then stopped coming. The trader had pressed it into Hal's hand one evening without much explanation and said only that if something large and important ever needed help, that frequency would reach people who could provide it. Hal had kept it. He was not entirely sure why. He was not the kind of man who threw things away. He went to the communication console at the side wall, entered the frequency carefully, and sent a short burst signal. No words. Just the code from the card, repeated 3 times the way the trader had told him. Then he stepped back and waited. No response came. He had not expected one immediately. He went back to work. He moved equipment for the next hour. Heavy pieces, things on wheels, things that could be pushed into doorways and left there looking accidental. The eastern access doors got a loader pressed against them from the inside. The side bay entrance got a shelving rack turned sideways across the frame. He checked the main doors, checked the locks, checked the sight lines from outside the windows. Then he heard the transport. It was a gray vehicle, unmarked, and it pulled up outside the main entrance at almost exactly the moment the port registrar's office opened. Hal watched it from the high window on the north wall. 4 men got out. They moved in that careful, practiced way that people move when they do things like this regularly. They were not rushing. Rushing drew attention. They walked toward the registrar's office like men with a reasonable question and all the time in the world. Hal went to his engine block in the center of the main floor. He picked up a wrench. He began working. They came in 20 minutes later. The main hangar door opened and the lead man stepped in first, the other 3 spreading out slightly behind him without being told to. The lead man was calm-faced, medium height, wearing a jacket that was just slightly too warm for the season. "Morning," the man said. "Morning," said Hal without looking up. "We're looking for a downed vessel. Something large came down in the outer field east of here last night. You see anything?" Hal turned a bolt slowly. "Lot of wind last night. Debris comes down sometimes. Happened twice last winter." "This wasn't debris," the man said. His voice stayed pleasant. Hal looked up then. He looked at the man the way he looked at engine components he suspected of being faulty. Steady and unhurried and not particularly impressed. "Port Authority handles crash reports. Office opens at 8. Down the road, green door." The man held his gaze. Hal held it back. Neither of them moved for a moment that lasted a little longer than comfortable. Then the man nodded once, said thank you, and led the others back out. Hal watched the transport from the window. It pulled away from the main entrance, moved down the port road, and then instead of turning toward the Port Authority office, it curved slowly around the perimeter of the boundary fence toward the eastern side. Circling. Hal set down his wrench. He walked back to the communication console and sent the burst signal again. 3 times. Then he went to the eastern wall, picked up the heaviest wrench he owned, and stood where he could see both the side door and the maintenance bay entrance. When the transport came back, Hal was already waiting. He had a plan. It was simple. Simple things held. The hangar was very quiet in the hour before they came back. Hal stood near the eastern wall and listened. The transport had circled the perimeter twice now. He had watched it from the high window each time, moving slow and deliberate along the boundary fence, the way something moves when it is measuring a situation before committing to it. They were not rushing. That was the part that bothered him most. Rushing meant uncertain. Not rushing meant confident. He went to the maintenance bay. The hatchling was exactly where he had left it, sitting very still inside the ring of tarps and his oversized work jacket, the thermal material bunched up around its small shoulders. Its amber eyes found him the moment he ducked around the cargo loader. It had not made a sound. Not once. In 2 hours of waiting in a cold dark corner, it had been completely silent. Hal crouched down in front of it. He had not asked its name yet. He realized that now, and it struck him as an odd thing. He had fed it a spare heat pack, moved it across the hangar, hidden it behind heavy machinery, and sent distress signals on its behalf, all without knowing what to call it. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. The hatchling looked at him. It said something first in its own tongue, something that moved through several sounds Hal's mouth could not have shaped if he tried for a year. Then it said, "Sil. You can call me Sil." "Hal," he said. "That's mine." Sil looked at him steadily. "I know." The one at the front desk said it when the men were asking questions. "Oh. The night mechanic." Hal almost smiled at that. "Almost. You were listening." "I listened to everything," Sil said simply. He believed it. There was something very old in the way this small creature paid attention to the world around it. Not the oldness of age but the oldness of necessity. It had learned early that listening carefully was the thing that kept you alive. He was about to stand when Sil moved. It shifted its left wing forward and reached beneath it with its small claws, carefully, the way someone reaches for something they have been protecting for a very long time. It took a moment. Then it brought out a case. Hal looked at it. It was flat and oval, not much larger than both his hands held side by side. It was made of interlocked scales, small ones, fitted together with a precision that had nothing to do with tools and everything to do with something deliberate and careful and old. The seams between the scales were filled with a dark resin that had hardened smooth. There was no latch, no hinge, no visible way to open it. It was sealed completely. And it was warm. Even from where he was crouching, Hal could feel it. A low, steady warmth coming off the surface of it like a coal kept carefully banked. Sil held it out to him. Hal hesitated. Then he took it in both hands and held it carefully. The warmth moved through his palms. It was not heat exactly. It was something gentler than that. Something that felt, in a way he could not have explained to anyone, like something alive and small and very patient waiting quietly inside. "Eggs," Sil said. The word came out soft and serious. 7 of them. The last ones from our line. Our bloodline has been hunted for 3 generations. We were many once. Now there is my mother and me and what is in that case." Hal did not say anything. He looked down at the case in his hands. "My mother carried them across 4 sectors, Sil continued. "She was attacked above the Cauldron Belt by the same men who are outside now. They have been following us for 11 days. She was hurt badly in the attack but she would not stop flying. She told me she would not stop until we reached the sanctuary route or until she could not fly anymore." Hal thought about the wound. The length of it. The depth. The way the dragon mother had been lying in that grass like something that had given absolutely everything it had and had nothing left. She had flown 11 days with that wound getting worse, carrying 7 eggs and a small hatchling, being hunted across 4 sectors, and she had made it here. She had made it to this port, to this hangar, to a night mechanic with a kit bag and a set of clamps. Hal looked at the case for another long moment. Then he held it out and handed it back to Sil, carefully, the way he handled the most delicate components he worked with. Sil took it and tucked it back beneath its wing without being asked, the motion smooth and practiced. Hal was quiet for a moment. There were 7 living things in that case. The last of something that had existed for longer than this port, longer than this city, longer probably than most things Hal could name. And outside, men in an unmarked transport were circling the building looking for them. He stood up. From the eastern side of the hangar came a sound. Low and deliberate. Metal under pressure, working against a lock that was resisting but would not resist much longer. Boots on the outer step. Hal reached down and picked up the heavy wrench from where he had set it against the shelving unit. He felt the familiar weight of it settle into his hand. He had carried a wrench for 30 years. He knew exactly what it was good for and exactly what it was not. Today he suspected he was going to find out some things that fell outside the usual category. He looked back at Sil one last time. "Stay here," he said. "Do not come out for any reason unless I call your name. You understand?" Sil looked at him with those steady amber eyes. "You are one person," it said quietly. "They are more than one." "Yes," said Hal. "That does not worry you?" Hal turned toward the sound of the eastern door giving way under pressure. "I know this building," he said. "They don't." And he walked toward the sound of boots forcing open the eastern door. The eastern door came open with a sharp crack of metal. Hal was already positioned. He stood in the center of the main hangar floor in front of the cargo crane, with the wrench in his right hand and his back to the maintenance bay. He had turned off 2/3 of the overhead lights before they came in. The far corners of the hangar were dark. The middle, where he stood, had just enough light to see by. He had chosen that carefully. 6 men pushed through the broken door and spread out across the floor. They moved well together, the way people move when they have practiced moving together. They had proper equipment now. Jackets open. Things visible at their sides that had not been visible in the morning. The lead man stopped when he saw Hal standing there. He looked at the wrench. He looked at Hal's face. He looked at the cargo crane positioned across the floor like a wall. "Last chance," the lead man said. "Move away from the bay and this is simple." "Nothing about this is simple," Hal said. "You should leave." The lead man looked at him for a moment the way people look at something they have decided is not a serious problem. Then he nodded at the 2 men on his left and they began moving wide around the crane, trying to circle toward the maintenance bay entrance. Hal hit the toggle on the post beside him. The overhead lights in the left section of the hangar went out completely. All of them at once. The 2 men circling left walked straight into sudden darkness and stopped moving because walking fast in total darkness in an unfamiliar building is how people get seriously hurt, and they knew it. Hal was already moving right. He knew this floor. He knew it the way he knew his own hands. He knew exactly where the support columns were, exactly where the cable runs crossed the ground, exactly where the low-hanging crane arms sat at chest height to a standing man who was not paying attention. He moved through the half-dark quickly and quietly, the way a person moves through a place they have spent 20 years memorizing. The man on the far right had gotten around the crane. He was moving toward the maintenance bay entrance. Hal came at him from the side, from between 2 parked loaders that the man had not looked at, and the wrench came down hard on the man's forearm. Not his head. Not his body. His forearm. The man made a short sharp sound and dropped what he was holding and grabbed his arm with his other hand. Hal kept moving. The lead man was shouting now. Organizing. Trying to pull his people together in a floor that had too many shadows and too many obstacles and one mechanic who seemed to know exactly where everyone was even when they could not see him. Hal reached the wall console. He hit the second toggle. The cargo crane began to move. It was an old overhead crane, electric, slow but very large and very loud. It ground into motion along its ceiling track with a sound like rolling thunder and began swinging the main hook and cable in a slow arc across the center of the floor. 3 of the men who had been trying to regroup in the middle scattered immediately because a 200-kilogram steel hook swinging at chest height in the semi-dark is something that every sensible person moves away from without needing to think about it. 2 men had flashlights now. Beams cut across the floor, crossing each other, finding Hal for a moment behind a support column and then losing him as he moved again. He was not trying to fight 6 armed men. He understood that completely. He was trying to make 6 armed men feel like the building itself was against them, which was a different thing entirely and considerably more achievable. He pulled a shelf unit down across the path between 2 columns. Not at anyone. Just across the path, with a crash that echoed hard off the metal walls and made every flashlight beam swing toward the sound while he moved in the opposite direction. He was breathing hard now. His knee hurt where he had clipped a loader corner in the dark. His eyebrow had met someone's elbow in the chaos and was bleeding slowly down the side of his face. He pressed his sleeve to it without stopping moving. The lead man had gotten himself organized again. He had pulled his people to the center of the floor and they were moving as a group now toward the maintenance bay, slower and more careful, flashlights up and covering each other. It was smarter. It was going to work eventually. Hal knew that. He was one person and this building was big but not infinitely big and he was running out of obstacles to put between them and Sil. He got to the wall panel beside the main doors. He hit the switch that ran the external flood beacon. The massive light on the outer roof of the hangar burst on, blazing white light outward across the port grounds and the outer field and the sky above. A signal. The only one he had left. He turned back to the floor. The lead man had seen what he did and understood it meant something even if he did not know what. The man looked at Hal across the dark floor with an expression that had shifted from confident to calculating. Then the sound came. It started low. A deep harmonic hum that Hal felt in his chest before he heard it properly with his ears. It built fast, rising in layers, and then the roof of the hangar began to vibrate and the high windows filled with light from outside, bright and moving, descending. Sanctuary ships. 2 of them. Large and fast, dropping through the cloud cover with their landing lights blazing, settling onto the port grounds outside with a sound like controlled thunder. Every man on the floor went still. The lead man looked at the ceiling. He looked at his people. He looked at Hal standing alone across the floor, bleeding from one eyebrow, still holding the wrench, still between them and the maintenance bay. He made the only sensible decision available to him. He spoke one quiet word to his team and they moved back toward the broken eastern door and out into the morning and did not come back. Hal stood in the quiet that followed and breathed. The sanctuary team was fast and professional. They came through the main doors with equipment and calm voices and went directly to the outer field where the Dragon Mother had been lying since the night before. Hal walked them out there himself. They assessed her wounds, spoke among themselves in low voices, and then began the careful process of moving her toward their ship. They had the right equipment. They had clearly done this before. They praised the field repair work without making a large thing of it. One of them, a quiet woman with a medical kit, looked at the clamps and the sealant foam and the patch strips holding the wound together and said simply, "This bought her the time she needed." Then she went back to work. Sil stayed close to its mother through all of it. Small and silver and watchful, pressed against the great dark green flank as the team worked around them both. Hal stood back and let them work and watched. When they were ready to board, Sil walked beside its mother up the loading ramp. Then it stopped. It turned around. It came back down the ramp. Across the port ground. Through the main hangar doors. Across the long concrete floor, past the overturned shelf unit and the still swinging crane hook and the things scattered in the dark from the struggle. Its small claws made quiet sounds on the ground. It stopped in front of Hal. It looked up at him for a moment without speaking. Then it reached out one small claw and pressed it gently against the back of his hand. Not grabbing. Not holding. Just pressing, warm and light and deliberate, the way you touch something you want to remember. "Warm hand," it said softly. Hal looked down at the small silver dragon in front of him. "What does that mean?" he asked, though some part of him already knew. "It means the one who stayed," Sil said. "When they did not have to. When leaving would have been easier. When no one would have blamed them for walking away." It paused. "There is no higher word in our tongue. My mother wanted you to have it." Hal was quiet for a long moment. "Go with your mother," he said. "She needs you close." Sil held his gaze for one more moment. Then it turned and walked back across the hangar floor and up the ramp and the sanctuary ship doors closed behind it. Hal stood in the empty hangar and listened to the ships rise. The sound built and then faded and then the sky was quiet again and Port Caldren was just a port again, cold and ordinary in the morning light. He picked up his lantern. He picked up his kit bag. He picked up the wrench, still dented from the morning, and hung it back on its hook on the wall. Then he went to find the engine block he had never finished servicing. The night shift at Port Caldren was never busy. But some nights, Hal was beginning to understand, were not really about the work at all.